Hello! In this lecture, you will learn about some of the research methods that we use in phonetics. You know that phonetics is the scientific study of speech sounds, and we can study the speech sounds on different levels, in different ways. So we can focus on the production of sounds, that is articulation, or the transmission of sounds through air, that is acoustics, or on how we receive and interpret sounds, that is audition and perception. We have focused on articulatory phonetics, that is the study of how speech sounds are made. And this is also how speech sounds are classified in the International Phonetic Alphabet, according to what happens during their articulation. So I would like to tell you how we find out what happens in the body during the articulation of sounds. And we can study again different aspects of articulation of sounds. We can look at what is happening in the larynx, what is happening with the vocal folds. That is, we can look at how we produce voice or phonation. And then we can also look at what is happening in the mouth. What is the tongue doing? Where is the constriction happening and how is it happening? So, in other words, we can study how voicing happens in the body and how place of articulation and manner of articulation happen. Voice is made by the vocal folds inside of the larynx, and depending on how much contact there is between the vocal folds, we can make different sounds. So, if the vocal folds are fully open, then the air can go out and in, but no sound will be made. If the vocal folds are fully closed, then we can swallow without anything going inside the trachea. But in between, if we put the vocal folds together, if they're loosely closed or just slightly open, we produce different sounds. We can make modal phonation, that is the standard voice. We can produce breathy voice. We can produce creaky voice. But how do we know exactly what is happening with our vocal folds when we do those? In order to look inside the larynx and see what is happening when we produce modal voice, we use a very high-speed video camera. It has to be very, very fast because the vocal folds vibrate very fast. For males, you get between 100 and 130 vibrations per second, and for females even more than that, between 190 and 220 per second. So if we want to capture the vocal folds at each point of their movement, we need a camera that is going to make very, very quick photos. By taking multiple snapshots like this, it is possible to see the details of the movement of the vocal folds. Another way to find out what's happening in the larynx without going inside of the throat is to use a laryngograph, also called electroglotograph, or EGG for short. What it does is it passes a small electric current between the vocal folds. So there are electrodes on your neck outside, which measure the amount of contact between the vocal folds. And so here on this picture, you can see the image from the stroboscope. So you can see the video, the pictures taken by the camera, and the corresponding signal from EGG underneath. And you will see that the EGG signal looks like a wave, and that's the wave that tells you if it's high. The high point tells you that the vocal folds are fully touching, and the low level tells you that the vocal folds are apart. And so you can see that where the red line is corresponds to the EGG signal for the stroboscopic image above it. And in this way, we can see through both video and through the EGG signal the changes in the vibration, the vocal folds coming together and apart during the production of modal voice. For looking inside of the mouth and seeing what is happening in the mouth when the constriction is produced, we have other methods. First of all, the simplest method is palatography or laryngography, which are related. And in these methods, we basically put paint either on the tongue or on the roof of the mouth. And after the person produces a sound, we see where the paint was transferred. So if the tip of the tongue, if the tongue is painted black and the tip of the tongue touches the alveolar ridge, then after saying T, we will see a black mark on the alveolar ridge. And you can see this is exactly what happens when you produce an English T, which is an alveolar stop. So there will be full contact between the tongue blade and the alveolar ridge, and you see that the marker paint is left on the palate as expected in the palatogram and around the edges of the tongue in a linguogram. A more technologically advanced method to do the same thing is electropalatography, where instead of paint, we use an artificial palate, which we put inside of the mouth of the speaker, and it has electrodes that register touch. So as the person is speaking, it is recording exactly where and how much of contact there was between the tongue and the palate, so we can learn exactly about the places of articulation for all sounds. Another way to look at what is happening in the mouth, and not only where the end point of the sound is, but also how the movement of the tongue happens, is using ultrasound. An ultrasound probe sends out a wave, a sound wave, which is reflected back by the tissue. And in this way, we can see what is happening through soft tissue. That's why it's also used in pregnancy, so that we can look through the body inside of the belly, inside of the womb. For phonetics, we can do the same to look at the tongue, and in this way learn about how the tongue is moving. So we put the probe under the chin so that there are no bones interfering, and we can record the moving tongue, as you can see here in these in this picture. Ultrasound can also be useful in speech therapy, where the patient holds the probe under their chin and they can see exactly what their tongue is doing, and their therapist can also see that, and they can monitor and change what is happening as they speak. And we use ultrasound in the Phonetics lab at UAEU, and it is going to be in use for the speech-language pathology program soon. So here is a summary of the research methods that you learned about in this video lecture. First of all, we talked about the ways of looking at the source of sound, so the larynx and how voice is made. And for that, we can use electroglotograph, which measures the amount of contact between vocal folds, or stroboscopy, which does a video recording of the movement of vocal folds during voice production. And then we talked about how to look at articulation within the mouth, how are sounds made different, how is constriction happening. And for that, we can either look at just the end point, so just static, just one point where the sound is made. For that, we can use palatography and electropalatography and linguography to see the amount and the place of contact during a constriction between the tongue and the palate. Or we can use the dynamic tracking of the tongue through ultrasound imaging of the tongue so that we can track its movement. And those are all the research methods for today. Thank you.